Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to Luke I'm on TV. So today I'm going to be doing a book review of this book that I just read, which is Hawk, Occupation Skateboarder by Tony Hawk and Sean Mortimer. This was a really fun read. I enjoyed reading this book. I've always been a big fan of Tony Hawk and I've always been a fan of skateboarding, so this book was right up my alley. The book starts off with Tony recalling his night at the 1999 Summer X Games, in which after 13 years and many failed attempts, he finally landed a 900, and he did so on television. That was a very historic moment for the history of skateboarding, but also a very important night for Tony, as he points out that it was that night that really gave him a lot of closure. Throughout the years, Tony had always kept a list of tricks that he wanted to learn and complete. And the 900 was the one trick that seemed to always evade him. And really essentially the trick that haunted him as well, because every time he would go to attempt this trick, he would go hard so many times that eventually he'd end up hurting himself. And then he went and tried the trick for a while again after that. So it just really seemed to drive him nuts. A lot of skaters at the time seemed to think that the trick was impossible, but Tony never did. He always thought that it was possible, but it was really just a matter of time and really just a matter of having the right amount of speed and the right amount of air and really just the right amount of energy to really pull off the trick. So once Tony finally landed it after 10 attempts at the X Games, it really just gave him a great sense of relief. And of course, I think that was the moment too that really cemented Tony Hawk's status as a legendary skateboarder. I think that he had really proven himself before that, but really I think it really further cemented his status as a skateboarding innovator and a skateboarding legend. So it was really great to hear him talk about that and get that whole story. So after he talks about that night, he does quickly revert back and takes us back to the very beginning and talks about how when he was born, he was actually born as a mistake. His parents were in their 40s at the time, and really they thought that they were going to be entering this really nice, relaxed phase of their life when he came along. They already had a few other kids, and Tony just kind of came along as a surprise and essentially crashed their party. And, Tony says because of their age, he really feels that they had more of a grandparents type mindset at the time, and that they were very passive, and they really let him get away with a lot of things. They really let him eat whatever he wanted to eat and do whatever he wanted to do, and they really just let him get away with a lot of stuff. And he was just really a spoiled brat. And he even brings up one night in particular when they were having family game night at the house, and Tony started to lose on this game, and all of a sudden he just got so mad that he just took the board game and just threw it across the room. And years later, Tony would ask his mom, how did you guys put up with this? Because he was now a parent, and he's like, I would never put up with this. How did you guys put up with this? And supposedly her answer was that she knew that Tony was always very competitive, but it wasn't necessarily that he was being competitive with other people, but rather he was just very competitive within himself. Like, he was always his own worst critic. He was always very hard on himself, and he never wanted to lose. He never wanted to be a loser. He just always wanted to win and be the best at whatever he was doing. And obviously I think it was really that attitude that really just drove him throughout his entire career, and perhaps that's maybe the main reason why he's had so much great success in his career. But anyway, so he does talk a lot about that. And then he also talks about how his older brother Steve was the one that gave him his first skateboard, and how eventually he became obsessed with the sport and started to enter contests after a while, and then eventually joined the Powell Peralta team, and then became a pro at the age of 14, and then would go on to become a member of the legendary Bones Brigade team, who would make a series of skateboarding videos. And then eventually he even bought his first house when he was still in high school. Things like that was really cool and interesting to read about in this book. But also he talks a lot about a lot of the mocking and ridicule that he had suffered when he was a kid. He had gone to a number of different schools over the years, obviously, and Tony was always very skinny, and he always had bleach blonde hair, and he was very smart. He always took a lot of advanced courses in school, and he was also a skater, so he really took a lot of flack for all those things. And also, surprisingly, he also took a lot of flack from other skateboarders. A lot of them really mocked his style. A lot of them kind of said that a lot of his moves and style was very robotic. And also he took a lot of flack at the time for ollieing into his airs, which at the time Tony thought was a weakness, because he says that he thought that that was really the only way he could do it. He didn't really see any other way to do it. Back then, as he says in the book, that back then everybody early grabbed when they would come off a ramp or come over the coping of a pool. But he always ollied into his airs, and he just thought that was a weakness. But little did he know at the time that he was actually changing the game. He was actually changing the whole style of skateboarding without even knowing it. And of course now, as of 2000, when this book was published, he says now in the book everybody ollies into their airs now, and that a lot of these high-flying advanced tricks that everybody does wouldn't be possible if you still early grabbed, that you have to actually ollie into your air in order to perform the trick. So that's very interesting. So he does talk a lot about that as well. He talks a lot about the flack. Of course, he also talks a lot about his personal relationships with his family, his friends, other skaters. Talks about the Powell Peralta team, and then it talks about how he would eventually go on to form his own skateboarding team, Birdhouse, and things like that. Very cool, a lot of fun to read. And I thought that this book was pretty well written for the most part. Occasionally I thought he did kind of jump around from time to time, like in one chapter or sub-chapter he would be talking about like 1985, and then all of a sudden he'd like go back to like 1984 for some reason. So at times it was kind of hard to follow. You know, I always prefer a very strict timeline when I'm reading like an autobiographical book, or you know, something like that. And for the most part he keeps everything on track, but occasionally he does kind of stray, and I think it's because he starts to bring up one thing in particular, where if he's talking about music or he's talking about one thing in particular, like relationships, and he talks about, he'll go back a little bit and then he'll kind of bring you back up to speed. So, but so occasionally it does get a little confusing, a little hard to follow, but for the most part it does follow a pretty good timeline, has pretty good flow, and is pretty well written. So I think I'd probably give the book an 8 out of 10. For the most part, I think, again, very enjoyable book. I learned a lot, not just about Tony Hawk, but a lot about skateboarding as well. And I think the one thing that really grabbed me about the book, I think one thing that really just grabbed me, that one thing that I really learned, is that I don't think Tony was really what you call a naturally gifted skateboarder. I don't think he really had the natural ability. I think he just worked really, really hard at it. And he always just wanted to work to perfect something. He would do it over and over and over until he got it right. And one example he brings up in the book is, like when he was young, his dad would drop him off at the skate park, and he would come to pick him up later, and he'd be like, "Okay, Tony, it's time to go." And Tony would be like, "All right, Dad, just a few more minutes, just a few more tries." And then he'd skate for like another half hour. And then his dad would come back, "Okay, Tony, we really need to get going, come on." And Tony would be like, "All right, Dad, I almost got it, just a few more minutes." And then he'd skate for like another 20 minutes. And eventually this would go on for a while, and his dad would get so mad that he'd have to actually walk down to the skating area and physically grab him by the arm and try and pry him away. But still, sometimes Tony would still refuse. He did not want to leave. And I think it really just showed his heart and his passion, how much he loved skateboarding, and how much just determination he had. And he just always wanted to get it right. He just tried and he tried and he tried till he get it right. And I think, again, it goes back to like the 900 as well. You know, how he would try and try, even though he would hurt himself or whatever, he would just go and go and go until he landed it. He had that hard determination. And he was always determined, and always just set in his mind to do something. You know, he wasn't going to stop until he finally did it, until he finally landed, till he got it just right. And I think there's a great lesson to be learned from that. I think Tony is really a great living testament to the idea that if you really love something enough and you're passionate about it and you work hard enough at it, that maybe over time eventually you will become really good at it, and maybe possibly be successful. And again, I think that that's the thing that really grabbed me about the book, and the thing I really loved most about this book is just learning that about Tony. I don't think he had the natural ability, and maybe that's why people said that his moves were kind of robotic in nature, is because they were very calculated. He had done it over and over until he just kind of perfected it in his mind. You know, and I think that that's the thing that probably did separate Tony from other skaters, is that I think everybody was always, you know, trying hard and but they're more about probably having fun. I think Tony was having fun as well, but I think he probably took it more seriously than a lot of the other skaters. And I think that that's probably why he has had the amount of success that he has and essentially become the ambassador for the sport. I think that's really why, is because of his heart and his determination and his perseverance and just never stopping until he gets it right, until he does what he sets himself up to do in his mind. And I think that's just a great example, and he's a living testament to that idea, to how hard work and perseverance can eventually win out in the end. So anyway, this has been my book review for Hawk, Occupation Skateboarder by Tony Hawk and Sean Mortimer. As always, if you have enjoyed watching this video, please make sure to like, comment, or subscribe, and I'll see you next time.